All right, so you want to get into some of the heavier stuff, huh? Today we'll be taking a deep dive into polyelectrolyte precipitation.
Or, as it's also known, flocculation.
Right, flocculation. And we'll be looking at it specifically for removing cell mass and clarifying liquids.
Based on the material that you sent over, of course.
Exactly. But the goal here is to really give everyone listening a clear picture of how this whole technique works.
What it's used for.
The benefits.
The drawbacks.
The whole 9 yards.
Yeah, we want to get down into the nitty-gritty, not just what it is, but like the how and the why.
Exactly. So let's start with the heart of it all. Polyelectrolytes. What are they, and how do they actually cause cells to clump together?
Okay, so imagine you have these long chains of molecules, polymers, and they carry an electrical charge.
Okay.
Now, cells and lots of other particles floating around in, say, a fermentation broth or something also have charges on their surfaces. And the cool thing is, when you add in a polyelectrolyte with the opposite charge, it neutralizes the surface charge of those cells.
So they lose their ability to repel each other.
Exactly. You take away that electrostatic repulsion, and suddenly they're free to aggregate, to form those larger, heavier clumps that we call flocks.
Huh, interesting. And what about the actual process itself? I mean, it seems pretty straightforward. You add the polyelectrolyte, let those flocks form, and then separate them out, right?
Pretty much, yeah. You start by carefully adding in a dilute solution of your polyelectrolyte.
Okay.
Now, these can be either cationic, meaning positively charged,
Got it.
or anionic, negatively charged. Which one you use depends on what you're targeting.
Makes sense.
Like, for instance, the material you sent mentions polyethylenamine, or PEI, and chitosan as cationic examples.
Okay.
And then for anionic polyelectrolytes, there's polycyclic acid and alginate.
Right. So you add in one of those, it binds to the cells and other charged stuff.
Acts like a sort of bridge between them,
Right.
and those larger, heavier, settleable flocks start to form. Then the last step is just separating those flocks out.
Which, as that figure in the material, Fig, polyelectrolyte precipitation technique, flocculation, shows us, can be done by simple settling.
Or, if you want to speed things up, by centrifugation or filtration.
Cool. So where would someone actually use this technique? What kind of applications are we talking about?
Well, you'll see it a lot in biotech, like for removing cell mass after a fermentation process.
Okay.
Or clarifying fermentation broths, which can often be pretty cloudy.
Right.
Basically, anytime you've got unwanted suspended solids in a liquid, this can be a good way to get rid of them.
And this is often done as a sort of pre-treatment before more hardcore purification methods, right?
Exactly. Which makes sense, given that hashtag downstream processing tag.
Yeah, for sure. It's all about getting the bulk of the stuff out of the way early on. So what makes this such a popular method for that initial separation?
Well, for one, it's pretty effective at clumping together even very fine particles.
Okay.
Cells, things like that might otherwise be hard to remove. It also drastically improves settling and dewatering.
Which I imagine is really important when you're dealing with huge volumes of liquid.
Oh, absolutely. Plus, it's relatively cheap.
All right, so it's effective, it's efficient, it's affordable. There's got to be some downsides. Right. What are the caveats?
Well, the biggest one is probably that it's not very selective.
Okay.
I mean, it'll basically flocculate anything with a charge, not just your target cells or molecules.
So it's like, dragging a net through the ocean. You're going to catch a lot of bycatch along with the fish you're after.
Pretty much, yeah. And that can obviously make things more complicated later on when you're trying to purify your final product.
Makes sense. What else?
Well, there's also the possibility of some polyelectrolyte carryover.
Meaning some of it ends up in your final product.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have to figure out how to get rid of that.
And I'm guessing it's not like there's a universal best polyelectrolyte for every situation.
Right. You really need to optimize things, figure out which type and what dosage works best for your specific needs.
So it's a variable tool, for sure, but you got to know how to use it properly.
Definitely. Polyelectrolyte precipitation is great for that initial bulk separation.
Fast, efficient, cost-effective.
But it's not a magic bullet, especially when it comes to purity.
Right. So to sum up, this flocculation method is a really useful way to handle large volumes of material and remove a ton of stuff early on in a process. But it's not super precise, and it often needs to be followed by more targeted purification steps to ensure a pure final product.
Exactly.
Now, that kind of makes me wonder, what are some of those more sophisticated methods that people use?
Oh, there are a bunch of different techniques out there.
Like what?
Well, chromatography is a big one.
Chromatography.
Different types of filtration, affinity-based methods. It really depends on what you're trying to purify and how pure you need it to be.
Right. So it's kind of like polyelectrolyte precipitation gets you most of the way there, but then you need these other techniques to really fine-tune things. Fascinating stuff. Well, everyone listening, if you're working on a bioprocess or just curious about the world of downstream processing, it's definitely worth exploring those more advanced purification methods further. Lots of cool stuff going on there.
For sure.
And with that, I think we'll wrap things up for today. Thanks for tuning in.